Some people spend their entire lives searching for proof that honesty still exists, while others lose faith after a single betrayal. Vincent Castellano had stopped believing decades ago. In New York, people whispered his name with equal parts admiration and fear, calling him the coldest mafia boss the city had ever known. It wasn't because he raised his voice. It wasn't because he surrounded himself with power. It was because nothing seemed capable of reaching the man behind the perfectly tailored charcoal suits and the expression carved from stone. Wealthy socialites chased his attention. Famous actresses tried to win his heart. Influential families offered daughters whose last names carried fortunes older than America itself. Vincent refused every invitation with the same calm nod, leaving behind confused smiles and bruised pride without ever looking back. To him, affection was another negotiation, loyalty another contract waiting to be broken, and promises were simply expensive words people abandoned the moment convenience appeared. On a cold October evening, rain washed the streets of Manhattan until every skyscraper shimmered beneath silver reflections. Inside the Castellano estate overlooking the Hudson River, a quiet tension drifted through marble hallways usually untouched by emotion. Security officers searched every corridor twice. Staff members retraced every step they had taken that afternoon. Somewhere inside the mansion, something priceless had disappeared. It wasn't the rare paintings that lined the walls. It wasn't the watches locked inside a private vault or the stacks of confidential documents resting behind reinforced steel. It was a simple platinum ring, worn smooth by time rather than luxury. Few people even knew it existed. Fewer still understood why Vincent never allowed it to leave his hand. Tonight, for the first time in nearly 15 years, it was gone. Every camera angle was reviewed. Every employee quietly questioned. Every possibility considered. Yet the ring had simply vanished, as though the city itself had decided to keep one of Vincent Castellano's last remaining memories. Outside, almost 12 miles away, Naomi Carter stepped off a crowded subway train, her shoes damp from hours of cleaning offices across Midtown. Her paycheck barely covered rent, groceries, and the medical bills waiting on her tiny kitchen table, but exhaustion had never taken away her habit of noticing what others ignored. Earlier that evening, she had spotted something glimmering beside a rain-soaked curb near an upscale restaurant. At first she thought it was costume jewelry. Then she turned it over beneath a streetlight and saw the intricate family crest engraved inside the band. It felt heavier than it looked, not because of its weight, but because it seemed to carry someone's entire history. She slipped it carefully into her coat pocket, not with excitement, but with quiet determination. By sunrise, one decision made by a stranger with nothing to gain would begin changing the life of the one man who believed every human heart had a price. Naomi Carter lived in a fifth-floor walk-up apartment in Harlem where every square foot served more than one purpose. The tiny kitchen became a dining room each evening. The living room transformed into her mother's bedroom at night, and the narrow table beside the window doubled as both a workspace and a place where unpaid medical bills quietly accumulated beneath a chipped ceramic bowl. She had long ago stopped counting how many extra shifts she worked every month because the number never seemed to matter. There was always another expense waiting just beyond the next paycheck. Yet despite everything life demanded from her, Naomi guarded one habit that hardship had never managed to steal. She believed that if something did not belong to you, then no amount of desperation could make it yours. She placed the platinum ring on the table beneath the warm glow of a small lamp and studied it again. Rainwater still clung to the engraved edges, revealing a crest that looked older than the city itself. Whoever owned it had not simply lost an expensive piece of jewelry. They had lost something that had been worn often enough for tiny scratches to soften the polished surface. The ring looked loved rather than displayed. Her mother slowly walked into the room, leaning on the hallway wall before settling into the chair across from her. Her tired eyes immediately noticed the ring. "Where did you get something like that?" she asked quietly. Naomi explained everything without embellishment, from the flashing reflection beside the curb to the empty sidewalk where no one had seemed to notice it was gone. Her mother listened without interrupting, then smiled with the same gentle warmth that had carried their family through years of uncertainty. "Someone is probably praying tonight that an honest person finds it," she whispered. Naomi looked back down at the ring. She could not ignore the truth. Selling it would erase months of unpaid bills. It would pay for treatments her mother had postponed. It could replace the aging heater that barely survived every New York winter. For a brief moment, temptation spoke with remarkable logic. Nobody had seen her pick it up. Nobody even knew her name. But another voice answered almost immediately, quieter yet stronger. She wanted to become the kind of person she could still recognize every morning in the mirror. The following day, before reporting for her housekeeping shift, Naomi visited 3 jewelry stores hoping someone might recognize the family crest. Each owner politely admired the craftsmanship before shaking their head. The 4th shop, tucked between a tailor and a bookstore, changed everything. An elderly jeweler adjusted his glasses the moment he saw the engraving. His expression shifted from curiosity to surprise. "Young lady," he said carefully, "that crest belongs to one of the oldest families in this city. If this ring is genuine, someone has been searching for it all night." He slid a business card across the counter with a handwritten address in elegant ink. Naomi thanked him, slipped the ring safely back into her coat pocket, and stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. She stared at the address for several silent seconds. It led directly to the gates of the Castellano estate, a place surrounded by stories, rumors, and whispered conversations throughout the city. She knew nothing about the man who lived there except that people spoke his name carefully. Still, she folded the card, took a slow breath, and boarded the next bus downtown, unaware that every mile carried her closer to a meeting neither of them had ever imagined. The iron gates opened without a sound, revealing a winding driveway lined with towering maple trees whose golden leaves drifted slowly across polished stone. Naomi tightened her grip on her worn canvas bag as she walked toward the front entrance, feeling strangely out of place among the quiet elegance surrounding her. She had cleaned dozens of luxury homes throughout Manhattan, yet this place carried a different kind of silence. It was not the silence of wealth. It was the silence of absolute control. Before she reached the front steps, 2 security officers approached with calm but cautious expressions. One politely asked her name and the reason for her visit. Naomi reached into her coat pocket and carefully removed the platinum ring without a word. Both men exchanged a quick glance before one of them disappeared inside while the other remained beside her. Minutes passed. The autumn wind carried the scent of rain through the gardens, and neither of them spoke. Finally, the massive front doors opened. Naomi was escorted through a grand foyer where marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers above, yet despite the beauty surrounding her, the house felt remarkably empty. Every piece of furniture stood perfectly arranged, every painting perfectly centered, but there was almost no trace of laughter or ordinary life. She was guided into a spacious library where floor-to-ceiling bookshelves framed tall windows overlooking the river. A man stood near the fireplace with his back turned, one hand resting casually in the pocket of his tailored coat. Without turning around, he asked in a calm voice, "Where did you find it?" Naomi immediately recognized that this could only be Vincent Castellano. She answered honestly, describing the rain, the sidewalk, and the moment she noticed the ring reflecting beneath a streetlight. Only then did he slowly face her. His expression revealed nothing beyond quiet observation. His gray eyes studied every detail, not with hostility, but with the practiced discipline of someone who had spent years measuring truth without relying on words alone. Naomi stepped forward and placed the ring gently on a polished wooden table between them. "I believe this belongs to you," she said. Vincent looked down at the ring, but made no move to touch it. Instead, he asked another question. "Did you know what it was worth?" Naomi nodded. "Enough to change my life." The answer lingered in the room. One of the security officers glanced toward Vincent, almost expecting the conversation to end there. Instead, Vincent asked quietly, "Then why are you standing here instead of somewhere far away?" Naomi smiled softly, though her eyes carried the fatigue of someone who had faced difficult choices more than once. "Because I want a better life," she replied, "but not one that begins with taking something that belongs to someone else." For the first time in many years, Vincent found himself without an immediate response. Countless people had entered this room asking for investments, partnerships, favors, influence, or forgiveness. This young woman had asked for nothing. She had simply returned what was never hers. He finally reached for the ring, turning it slowly between his fingers as though confirming it was real. The familiar weight settled into his palm, bringing with it memories he had carefully buried beneath years of discipline. He looked back at Naomi, searching for hidden motives that refused to appear. The silence stretched longer than either of them expected. Then Vincent did something his staff had rarely witnessed. He thanked her. It was only 2 words, spoken almost above a whisper, but every person standing inside the library understood they had just watched something far more valuable than a priceless ring find its way home. Naomi expected the meeting to end the moment she placed the ring back into its rightful owner's hands. She gave a polite smile, thanked the security officer who had escorted her inside, and quietly turned toward the library doors. Before she reached them, Vincent spoke again. "Miss Carter." His voice remained calm, yet there was something different beneath its measured tone. "Please wait." She stopped and looked back. Vincent walked to a small desk near the window, opened a drawer, and removed a plain white envelope. He placed it on the table between them. "You should accept this," he said. "Anyone else would have." Naomi glanced at the envelope, but made no effort to touch it. She did not need to open it to understand what it contained. Even a modest reward from someone like Vincent Castellano would cover months of rent. She folded her hands together and answered with quiet respect. "I appreciate the gesture, but I did not return your ring because I expected payment." Vincent studied her expression carefully. During years of negotiations, he had become remarkably skilled at recognizing rehearsed humility, calculated kindness, and carefully disguised ambition. Yet nothing in Naomi's face suggested performance. She simply believed what she had said. "Everyone expects something," he replied. "If not money, then influence. If not influence, then opportunity." Naomi shook her head gently. "Sometimes doing the right thing is enough." The words settled into the room with surprising weight. She offered one final nod before leaving the library, her footsteps fading across the marble floor until the front doors quietly closed behind her. Silence returned to the estate, but it no longer felt familiar. Vincent remained standing beside the table, his fingers resting lightly against the platinum ring. One of his senior advisors entered a few moments later after receiving permission. "Should we verify her story?" he asked. Vincent gave a slow nod. "Everything." By sunset, several discreet reports began arriving. Naomi Carter, 30 years old. No criminal record. No lawsuits. No unexplained bank deposits. She worked 2 housekeeping jobs and occasionally helped at a neighborhood church pantry on weekends. Every employer described her with nearly identical words. Dependable, honest, quiet. She had never asked for favors and had never been accused of taking anything that did not belong to her. Vincent continued reading long after the report should have satisfied his curiosity. One page described how she often stayed after her shifts without charging extra whenever an elderly client needed help organizing groceries or carrying laundry upstairs. Another noted that she regularly declined tips from people she believed could not comfortably afford them. None of these details made sense to him. In his experience, hardship usually forced people toward compromise. Naomi seemed to move in the opposite direction. The following morning, Vincent stood alone beside the large windows overlooking the Hudson River. He slipped the ring back onto his finger, but something felt different. For years, he had believed trust was the privilege of fools and generosity was merely another investment expecting returns. Then a woman with worn shoes, tired eyes, and unpaid bills had quietly walked into his home, returned the one possession he could never replace, refused a reward that would have transformed her circumstances, and left without asking for anything at all. For the first time in longer than he cared to remember, Vincent found himself thinking not about protecting what he owned, but about understanding the person who had reminded him that integrity could still exist where the world least expected to find it. Over the next several days, Vincent resisted the impulse to contact Naomi, telling himself that curiosity was not a reason to interrupt another person's life. Yet every time he glanced at the platinum ring resting once again on his hand, he remembered the quiet certainty in her voice when she had said that doing the right thing was enough. Those words lingered longer than any business negotiation or carefully crafted speech he had heard in years. Eventually, curiosity overcame routine. Without announcing his intentions to anyone except his most trusted driver, Vincent asked to be taken to one of the office buildings where Naomi worked during the evening. He remained inside a parked sedan across the street, hidden behind lightly tinted windows. watching people stream through the revolving doors as daylight slowly faded into the soft glow of Manhattan at dusk. Naomi emerged carrying a simple cleaning cart, moving from one office to another with steady patience. She greeted every employee with the same warm smile regardless of their position. She thanked the security guard who held an elevator door. She picked up a stack of papers someone had accidentally dropped without expecting acknowledgement. When an older janitor struggled to lift a heavy supply box, she quietly stepped forward to help before continuing her own work. None of those gestures appeared rehearsed. There was no audience to impress and no reward waiting at the end of the evening. She simply treated every person with the same respect she hoped to receive herself. Vincent found that strangely difficult to understand. The following afternoon, he visited another neighborhood where Naomi spent several hours each weekend volunteering at a small church pantry. He arrived wearing an ordinary navy coat instead of his usual tailored suits, blending into the crowd more easily than anyone would have imagined. Families lined up patiently outside the modest brick building, collecting groceries and warm meals. Naomi greeted each visitor by name whenever she could remember it. She knelt beside a little boy whose backpack zipper had broken, carefully fixing it with a small safety pin she carried in her pocket before handing him an apple with a cheerful smile. Moments later, she noticed an elderly man struggling with 2 grocery bags and walked nearly half a block beside him, refusing to let him carry the heavier one alone. She returned slightly out of breath, but still smiling as though kindness itself had filled her with energy instead of taking it away. Vincent watched quietly from across the street, his attention drawn not to dramatic acts of generosity, but to the countless small decisions most people overlooked. Every gesture seemed effortless because none of them were performed for recognition. On the drive back, his driver finally broke the silence. "Sir, do you believe she knows someone has been watching?" Vincent looked out at the city passing beyond the window. "No," he answered softly. "And that is exactly why I believe everything I have seen." That evening he sat alone in his library, the same room where Naomi had refused an envelope that could have changed her finances overnight. He realized he had spent years measuring people by what they wanted from him, never considering what they chose when nobody important was looking. For the first time in many years, Vincent was not trying to uncover a hidden motive. Instead, he found himself wondering whether a single honest soul could quietly change a life that had forgotten how to believe in people at all. Several evenings later, Vincent unlocked a small cedar box that had remained untouched for years. It rested on the highest shelf of his private study, away from business records and family portraits, hidden behind rows of leather-bound books that few visitors ever noticed. Inside lay a faded photograph, a silver pocket watch that no longer worked, and a handwritten letter folded so many times that its edges had become soft with age. He carefully removed the photograph first. It showed a much younger version of his father standing outside a modest neighborhood bakery, smiling with one arm around a little boy who could barely reach his waist. The platinum ring gleamed on his father's hand exactly as it now rested on Vincent's finger. There had never been extraordinary wealth in that photograph, only pride, warmth, and the quiet confidence of a man who believed that a person's word mattered more than any fortune. Vincent had been only 12 years old when his father placed that same ring into his palm. One day, he had said, "People will judge you by what you own. Do not let them forget to judge you by what you return." At the time, Vincent had not fully understood those words. Life had become far more complicated after his father's passing. Responsibility arrived too early, trust disappeared too quickly, and every lesson about kindness seemed buried beneath years of difficult choices. Eventually, the ring stopped reminding him of who his father had been and became nothing more than the last physical connection he refused to lose. That was why its disappearance had shaken him more deeply than anyone inside the estate could understand. It had never been about the value of precious metal. It had been about the fear of losing the final piece of a man whose voice had slowly faded from memory. Vincent unfolded the old letter and read the familiar handwriting once again. His father had written that true character revealed itself when nobody expected honesty and nobody offered applause for doing the right thing. For years, Vincent had dismissed those words as belonging to a simpler world that no longer existed. Then Naomi Carter had walked into his library carrying the one object that could have solved her financial struggles, placed it gently on the table, and quietly refused every reward he offered. She had unknowingly lived the very lesson his father had tried to teach him decades earlier. The realization settled over him with surprising force. Naomi had never heard his father's advice. She had never known the history behind the ring. Yet somehow she had honored it more faithfully than he had in years. The following morning, Vincent attended a routine business breakfast overlooking Central Park, surrounded by influential executives discussing investments, acquisitions, and market forecasts. Their conversations blurred into distant background noise. His attention kept drifting toward the ring resting against his coffee cup as sunlight reflected softly from its worn surface. He suddenly understood why it no longer felt exactly the same after returning to his hand. The ring itself had not changed. He had. For the first time in many years, it no longer reminded him only of what he had lost. It reminded him that somewhere in a city of millions, one ordinary woman had preserved a piece of his father's legacy without ever knowing it existed. And that quiet act of integrity had awakened something inside him that he believed had disappeared forever. As autumn settled deeper over New York, small changes began unfolding so quietly that almost nobody noticed them except Vincent himself. He no longer viewed Naomi Carter as a name inside a report or a face remembered from a brief meeting. She had become a living reminder that his father's words had not belonged to another generation after all. Yet Vincent also understood something equally important. The fewer people who knew about her connection to him, the better. He instructed everyone within his household that her visit to the estate would remain private. No discussions, no speculation, no unnecessary attention. Most agreed without question. Unfortunately, cities had a way of carrying whispers farther than intentions. One afternoon, while Naomi finished cleaning a small accounting office in Midtown, she sensed someone studying her from the opposite side of the street. When she looked up through the window, the figure casually turned away and disappeared into the crowd before she could recognize a face. She dismissed the moment as coincidence. New York was full of strangers, and curiosity often meant nothing. Still, similar moments began repeating themselves. A familiar sedan appeared outside the grocery store twice within the same week. A man lingered near the church pantry without ever joining the line or entering the building. Even the elderly jeweler who had given her the Castellano address quietly mentioned that two well-dressed visitors had recently asked whether he remembered the young woman who had brought in the engraved ring. They had been polite, asking only ordinary questions before leaving, yet something about the conversation had unsettled him enough to mention it. Naomi thanked him and continued her day, refusing to let uncertainty replace her usual optimism. She believed there was often a reasonable explanation for unusual events. At nearly the same time, Vincent received an unexpected report from one of his advisors. Several independent inquiries had surfaced regarding the missing ring and the woman who had returned it. No threats had been made. No crimes had occurred. Yet someone with considerable resources seemed determined to learn why an ordinary housekeeper had briefly entered the Castellano estate. Vincent listened without interrupting, his expression remaining perfectly calm. Years of experience had taught him that curiosity often arrived long before real intentions became visible. He instructed his team to remain observant but not intrusive. "No one approaches her," he said evenly. "No one interferes with her routine. If she needs space, we respect it. If she needs help, she never feels watched." His advisors exchanged brief glances. They had expected a different response, perhaps one driven by suspicion or strategy. Instead, Vincent's concern, centered entirely on protecting the quiet life Naomi had never asked anyone to change. Meanwhile, Naomi continued caring for her mother, working long shifts, and volunteering every weekend exactly as she always had. She remained unaware that people with influence had begun speaking her name in private conversations she would never hear. The irony was impossible for Vincent to ignore. The woman who wanted nothing from his world had unintentionally stepped into its orbit simply because she had chosen honesty over opportunity. Standing alone beside the tall windows of his library that evening, Vincent watched the city lights shimmer across the Hudson River. Somewhere beyond that skyline, Naomi was probably finishing another ordinary day, unaware that the simple choice she had made on a rainy sidewalk was quietly reshaping more lives than her own. And for the first time in many years, Vincent realized that protecting hope sometimes required far greater wisdom than protecting power. The following week brought an unexpected invitation that Naomi almost declined. A neighborhood community center planned its annual appreciation dinner for volunteers, inviting local business owners, teachers, church members, and residents who quietly served others throughout the year. One of the organizers insisted that Naomi attend, reminding her that she had missed the celebration for 3 consecutive years because of work. After a gentle conversation with her supervisor, she agreed to leave her evening shift early for the first time in months. The event filled a modest hall with warm lights, homemade meals, and conversations that carried none of the formality of the city's grand banquets. Children laughed between tables while seniors shared stories over coffee. Naomi felt completely at home among people who measured success by kindness rather than status. Unknown to nearly everyone inside the room, Vincent had also received an invitation from the community center's director, a retired minister whose charitable foundation had quietly received anonymous support from the Castellano family for many years. Vincent almost ignored the request, as he usually did with public gatherings, unrelated to business. Yet when he noticed the event's location, he remembered that Naomi volunteered there every weekend. Without announcing his attendance, he arrived quietly, choosing a seat near the back where he attracted surprisingly little attention. He watched as Naomi greeted elderly guests, carried extra chairs for families arriving late, and gently calmed a nervous little girl who had become separated from her parents for only a few anxious minutes before they were happily reunited. She moved through the room exactly as she had in every place he had observed her, never seeking recognition and never expecting praise. During dinner, the community director thanked every volunteer by name. When Naomi's turn came, the applause lasted longer than she seemed comfortable accepting. She smiled modestly, lowered her eyes, and returned to her seat as though the recognition belonged to someone else. Vincent noticed something that surprised him even more than the applause itself. Every person who greeted Naomi appeared genuinely happy to see her. There was no obligation in their smiles, no calculation behind their conversations. Respect surrounded her naturally because she had earned it quietly over time. As the evening drew to a close, a sudden autumn rain swept across the neighborhood. Guests hurried beneath umbrellas while volunteers helped carry food and decorations indoors. Naomi remained behind, making certain every elderly visitor reached a waiting car safely before thinking about herself. Standing beneath the entrance canopy, Vincent watched her offer her own umbrella to an older woman, then prepare to walk several blocks home through the rain without hesitation. Before she stepped away, one of the community organizers approached Vincent, unaware that the two had already met. "She is remarkable, is she not?" the man said with a smile. Vincent looked toward Naomi as raindrops shimmered beneath the streetlights. "She is," he answered quietly. "She reminds people that goodness does not have to be loud to be unforgettable." In that simple moment, Vincent reached a decision he had carefully avoided for weeks. He would no longer remain a distant observer trying to understand Naomi from the shadows. If fate had placed their paths together once through a lost family heirloom, perhaps it was time to discover whether trust, like honesty, could begin with nothing more complicated than one sincere conversation. The rain had softened to a gentle mist by the time the last guests left the community center. Naomi stood beneath the entrance, watching volunteers stack folding chairs and carry empty serving trays back into the kitchen. She was preparing to begin the long walk toward the subway when she noticed a familiar black sedan pull quietly to the curb. The rear door opened, and Vincent stepped onto the sidewalk holding a single umbrella. He was dressed as simply as she had ever seen him, without the formality that usually surrounded him. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The city seemed unusually quiet, as though even the traffic had decided not to interrupt what was about to happen. Vincent walked toward her with measured steps and offered the umbrella. Naomi smiled politely, but gently shook her head. "You should keep it," she said. "Your driver is waiting." Vincent looked toward the rain before answering. "I brought it for you." There was no command in his voice, only sincerity. Naomi accepted the umbrella with quiet gratitude, and together they began walking slowly toward the corner where the subway entrance glowed beneath the streetlights. After several moments of comfortable silence, Vincent reached into his coat pocket and removed the platinum ring. Under the reflection of the city lights, its worn surface carried the same quiet history it always had. He held it in the palm of his hand before looking at Naomi. "I have been thinking about this ring every day since you returned it," he said. "Not because I almost lost it, but because you reminded me why it mattered in the first place." Naomi listened without interrupting. Vincent continued, his voice softer than she remembered from their first meeting. "My father believed that character is revealed when no one is watching. I spent years forgetting that lesson. You remembered it without ever meeting him." He carefully closed her hand around the ring. Naomi immediately looked surprised and tried to give it back. "I cannot accept this," she said. "It belongs to your family." Vincent smiled for what felt like the first genuine time in many years. "It will always belong to my family," he replied. "But the lesson behind it belongs to the person who brought it home." Naomi slowly opened her hand again, looking down at the familiar crest. She understood that he was not giving away an heirloom. He was sharing the trust that had returned with it. After a thoughtful pause, she gently placed the ring back into Vincent's hand instead. "Then keep wearing it," she said with quiet confidence. "Not to remember what you lost, but to remember what you found." Vincent looked at the ring for several long seconds before sliding it back onto his finger. Somehow it fit differently now, not because its shape had changed, but because the weight in his heart had become lighter. They reached the subway entrance, where Naomi thanked him once again for the umbrella and wished him a peaceful evening before disappearing down the stairs. Vincent remained standing beneath the lights, watching until she was gone. He realized that nothing about his position, his wealth, or his influence had truly changed that autumn. What had changed was the way he measured people, and more importantly, the way he measured himself. As the rain finally stopped and the clouds slowly parted above the skyline, the city carried on exactly as it always had. Yet somewhere between a lost ring and an honest stranger, one guarded heart had remembered that dignity could never be purchased, only recognized. And on that quiet night in New York, that simple truth became more valuable than anything money could ever hold.